Hey guys, how's it going? So today I am very excited to share with you a melee weapon build that I think has the potential to do 10,000 damage. And I believe to have factored in everything that can increase your melee damage in the game. So we're going to be working with perks, companion perks, sneak attacks, criticals, legendary weapon perks, legendary armor perks, power armor, and strength enhancing drugs. And I'm going to say this right now, this build is going to be extremely complicated, especially the math behind it. And throughout this build, you have to keep in mind that I'm trying to factor in everything in the entire game that can increase your melee damage. It's taken me about a week and a half to gather all this information, so there's no doubt in my mind it's going to be pretty complicated. And I should also mention that we're going to be using the Super Sledge in this build because it has the highest base damage of any other melee weapon. And what's interesting about melee weapons is in order to see the actual base damage, you have to have a strength of 0. Which I don't really think is possible unless you're on PC and you use console commands. So now that we have the basics out of the way, let's actually start with the build. Now obviously if you're making a melee build, the first thing you're going to want to have is a strength of 10. And this is important because every point you spec into strength, you're increasing your melee damage by 10%. And with that being said, this is where anything that increases your strength comes into play. So things like strength enhancing perks, strength enhancing drugs, legendary armor, and power armor all increase your strength, which then in turn increases your melee damage. So once you get strength rank 10, you're going to want to get big leagues at rank 5, and you also want rooted at rank 2. And big leagues at rank 5 actually doubles your melee damage, and rooted at rank 2 increases your melee damage by 50%. Some other perks that increase your melee damage are solar powered, which increases your strength by 2, which is 20% melee damage. Lady Killer increases your damage by 15%, but that's only to women. Lone Wanderer increases your damage by 25%, but that's only if you're adventuring without a companion. And Bloody Mess also increases your damage by 15%. And the perks that I just mentioned will increase the base damage of your weapon. Now aside from perks, we're also going to want to increase our strength as high as possible. And if you look right now, my strength is 5, but when I enter my power armor, it's going to be 12, so this increases my strength by 7, which then in turn increases my melee damage by 70%. Another thing you have to consider is fortifying armor. This increases your strength by 1. So you can see right now my strength is 5. And if I equip the fortifying leather right arm, my strength goes to 6. If you have 6 fortifying pieces of armor, you're going to increase your strength by 6, and that will increase your melee damage by 60%. And the last thing that I found that increased your strength were drugs and chems. So this increases your strength by 1, Buff Out increases your strength by 2, the Mysterious Serum increases it by 5, and Excel increases everything by 2, and that includes strength. So 1 plus 2 plus 5 plus another 2 is 10. So from drugs alone, you can actually increase your melee damage by 100%, or in other words, you can double your melee damage. And there is also a beverage called the Dirty Wastelander that increases your strength by 3. So if you use all the strength boosts I just told you about at the same time, you can have a maximum strength of 31. So once you have a strength of 31, you then want to multiply the base damage of your Super Sledge, which is 40, by 3.1. This gives you 124 damage. But to get the true base damage, you have to then add 40, which is the base damage, back onto 124. This gives you 164 damage. Now we have to factor in the perks that I mentioned earlier, such as Rooted, Big Leagues, Bloody Mess, Lone Wanderer, and Lady Killer. If you add up all those multipliers, you end up with a 3 times multiplier. So you take your 164 base damage and multiply that by 3. This gives you 492 damage. Now this is where the math gets tricky. If you think those two things are multiplied independently, or at least should be, and you don't think they stack, then you basically end up doing 164 plus 120 plus 40. This gives you 324. So once again, if you multiply them with each other, you get 492 damage, and if you multiply them independently and add them together, you get 324 damage. Now this is where the legendary weapon perk comes in. Since this build is focusing on the most damage you can do with a single strike, we're going to be using the Instigating legendary weapon perk as our perk of choice for this build. So that would mean you multiply 492 by 2, this gives you 984 damage, or if you think it should be multiplied independently, you multiply 324 by 2, and this gives you 648 damage. Now it's time we factor in another perk, and this perk would be Ninja, probably the most instrumental perk in the entire build. And at rank 3, this perk states melee sneak attacks do 10 times normal damage. So what that means is when you have your base damage of either 984 or 648, you're going to multiply that number by 10. So then that comes out to be 9,840 damage or 6,480 damage. So we're almost at 10,000 damage like I said, but here's when things get complicated once again. If you recall the companion Deacon, he has the ability to give you a perk called Cloak and Dagger, and this perk has the ability to increase sneak attack damage by 20%. In other words, this will increase your sneak attack multiplier to times 12. Now with a base damage of 984 and a sneak attack, you're going to be doing 11,808 damage. And of course, depending on how you do your math, you can then take your alternate base damage of 648 and multiply that by 12. This will give you 7,776 damage. And if things couldn't get any more insane, it's time to introduce another perk. This perk is called Better Criticals, and it says your criticals now do 2.5 times as much extra damage. Now something interesting about criticals is they work in a very unique way. Now when you trigger a critical, whether you get a sneak attack or not, you always have to multiply your critical multiplier by your base damage, as opposed to multiplying it by the number you get after you get a sneak attack. So once again, sneak attacks are independent from criticals. So how you calculate this is you take your base damage, ours being either 984 or 648, and you multiply those numbers by 2.5. Then you add that number to your total damage using a sneak attack. So once you tally that up, you have 11,808 damage plus 2,460, and once again that is your total sneak attack damage plus your total critical damage, and this comes out to be 14,268 damage. And of course you have your alternate option depending on how you want to do the math, which is 7,776 damage plus 1,620. This comes out to be 9,396 damage. So either way you do the math, either way you want to look at it, you're doing some insane damage. In order to achieve this amount of damage, you have to have all the conditions perfect according to the perks you've selected. So with the perk Solar Powered, you have to be in daylight. With the perk Lady Killer, your enemy has to be female. With the perk Lone Wanderer, you have to have no companion. With the perk Rooted, you have to be standing still. You also have to have all the strength buffs I talked about. You need to achieve a sneak attack, and you also have to initiate a critical. If you do all these things at the same exact time, you can then reach maximum damage with your melee weapon and do between 9,000 and 14,000 damage. Now if you have any questions about my build, make sure you leave it down in the comments section below. I'll try and answer to the best of my ability. And all the number crunching I did will also be in the comments section below. And this about wraps up the video, guys, so hopefully you enjoyed. Like, share, and subscribe for daily content, and we'll see you guys later. Thanks for watching.